The glass of water on the bedside table looked innocent, clear, cool. But Clara's heart hammered against her ribs with a frantic, suffocating rhythm. She could feel the vibrations in her teeth. The two men she had overheard in the corridor, men who were not his usual guards, men with flat, dead eyes, had spoken in low, urgent Korean, a language they assumed no one else on this pristine private floor of St. Jude's Metropolitan Hospital would understand. They were wrong. Her grandmother had been from Busan, and the words she'd taught Clara as a child were a ghost language in her mind, faint but persistent. Enough. She had understood enough. Her hands, usually so steady during procedures, trembled as she palmed the small, folded piece of surgical tape. Inside, written in the frantic scrawl of a ballpoint pen she'd snatched from the nurse's station, were 4 words. Your drink was switched. She approached his bed. Kwon Jin Woo, or, as his chart read, Mr. Park Joon-ho, a tech mogul recovering from a minor car accident. A lie. Everything about him was a carefully constructed lie, a fortress of wealth and power she had foolishly tried to scale. The accident had been a spray of bullets that had torn through his armored town car, and the gash on his temple, stitched neatly by the best plastic surgeon in the city, was from shattered, bulletproof glass. He watched her with those eyes that had undone her from the very first moment. They were dark, so dark they seemed to absorb the light in the room, and they held an ancient stillness that belied the violence clinging to him like a second skin. Even lying there, weakened and bandaged, he radiated an aura of absolute command. "Nurse Evans," he said, his voice a low rumble that did things to her insides she refused to acknowledge. "Come to check my vitals again?" She forced her expression to remain placid, professional. Her training kicked in, a blessed shield of clinical detachment. "Just making my final rounds for the shift, Mr. Park." She moved to his side, her movements practiced and efficient. She adjusted his pillow, checked the drip of his IV. Her fingers brushed his wrist, ostensibly to take his pulse, and in that fleeting electric contact, she slipped the folded tape into his palm. His skin was warm, his grip surprisingly strong as his fingers closed around the note, hiding it instantly. His eyes never left hers. They narrowed, a flicker of confusion followed by a sudden, sharp understanding that stole her breath. He knew. He knew this wasn't a flirtatious gesture. He knew it was a warning. She pulled her hand back as if burned. "Everything seems stable," she murmured, her voice a reedy whisper. "Try to get some rest." She turned and walked away, her back rigid, every nerve screaming. She did not look back. She could feel his gaze on her, a physical weight, a brand of heat and danger and something else she couldn't dare to name. She had just crossed a line. Not as a nurse, but as a woman who had tried and failed to run from the king of a dark and bloody world. And in that silent, sterile hospital room, she knew she had just thrown herself back into the heart of the storm. It had all started 6 months earlier, under the glittering chandeliers of a charity gala. Clara had been balancing a tray of champagne flutes, the cheap black dress provided by the catering company pinching at her shoulders. It was her second job, a necessary evil to chip away at the mountain of student loan debt that was her constant companion. She moved through the glittering crowd of old money and new tech, feeling invisible, a ghost in a polyester uniform. She was just part of the machinery that made a night like this run smoothly. Then she felt it. A gaze. It wasn't the casual, dismissive glance of a guest wanting a refill. This was different. It was heavy, intense, a laser beam cutting through the noise and the superficial chatter. She scanned the room and her eyes collided with his. He stood across the grand ballroom, leaning against a marble pillar, a glass of amber liquid held loosely in one hand. He was devastating. There was no other word for it. Dressed in a bespoke suit that probably cost more than her car, he possessed a severe, almost brutal beauty. High cheekbones, a sharp jaw, and hair as black as a raven's wing. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were locked on her, and in that moment, The entire sprawling room seemed to melt away. There was only him, looking at her, seeing her. Kwon Jin-woo felt the world tilt on its axis. He had attended 100 of these vapid events, a necessary performance to maintain the pristine facade of his legitimate businesses. He usually spent them in a state of profound boredom, his mind occupied with shipping routes, rival families, and the ever-present threat of betrayal. But then he saw her. She was not like the other women in the room, with their polished veneers and hungry eyes. She moved with a quiet grace, her expression a mixture of fatigue and focused determination. There was an authenticity to her that was like a drink of cold, clear water in a desert of artifice. Her skin glowed under the artificial light, and a stray curl had escaped her neat bun, resting against her temple. He felt an immediate, inexplicable pull, a magnetic force that rearranged his insides. It was absurd. It was illogical. It felt like destiny, a word he did not believe in. He watched as a drunk guest stumbled, knocking the tray from her hands, glasses shattered, champagne pooling on the polished floor, a collective gasp followed by sneers. The woman who had caused it laughed, a shrill, ugly sound, and waved a dismissive hand. Clara simply knelt, her face a mask of weary resignation, and began picking up the shards of broken glass. Something hot and protective flared in Jin-woo's chest. He pushed himself off the pillar. His second-in-command, Min-jun, materialized at his side, ever present, ever watchful. "Sir?" "Find out who she is," Jin-woo commanded, his voice low and hard, his eyes never leaving the woman on the floor. That was the beginning of his pursuit. He learned her name was Clara Evans, a registered nurse at St. Jude's. She worked double shifts to support a sick mother and pay off her nursing school debts. She lived in a tiny apartment in a neighborhood he wouldn't normally drive through without an armed escort. She was from a world so completely removed from his own, they might as well have been on different planets. He found the challenge intoxicating. The first bouquet of flowers arrived at the nurse's station a day later. 24 rare black baccarat roses. The card was simple. "Thank you for your grace under pressure." A guest from the gala. There was no name. Clara was baffled, her colleagues endlessly teasing. She threw them out. The gesture felt ostentatious, unsettling. The next day, an anonymous donation of 10 state-of-the-art EKG machines was made to her underfunded cardiology ward. Her supervisor was ecstatic. Clara was suspicious. He started appearing. At the small, worn-down coffee shop near her apartment building, he'd be sitting in a corner booth, reading a newspaper, looking utterly out of place in his tailored suit. The first time she saw him there, she froze, coffee halfway to her lips. It was the man from the gala. He looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers, and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She ignored him. She walked past him, her heart thumping a nervous rhythm. She felt his gaze follow her all the way to the counter. This continued for a week. Every morning, he was there, silent, watching. On the 5th day, her patience snapped. She marched over to his table and slammed her hands down on it. The few other patrons looked up, startled. "Okay, what is this?" she demanded, her voice low and furious. He slowly folded his newspaper, his expression unreadable. "Good morning, Nurse Evans." The sound of her name on his lips, that deep, resonant voice, sent a shiver down her spine she angrily ignored. "How do you know my name? Are you following me? Because this is creepy. This is stalker-level creepy." A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. It was a devastatingly effective weapon. "I am not following you. I am simply enjoying the coffee." "In a $1,000 suit? In this neighborhood?" "I doubt it," she shot back, her arms crossed over her chest. "This is harassment." "My apologies if my presence is unsettling," he said, his tone infuriatingly calm. "I merely wanted to speak with you, and this seemed the most neutral ground." "There's nothing neutral about this. Is this even legal?" His smile widened slightly. "Most things are, for the right price." It was a chilling statement, delivered with the casual air of a man discussing the weather. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Please, sit. 5 minutes." Against her better judgment, she sat. She was wary, but she was also undeniably intrigued. No one had ever looked at her the way he did, as if she were the only person in the world. "What do you want?" she asked bluntly. "To have dinner with you," he replied, just as blunt. She let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Absolutely not." "Why?" "Why?" "Because I don't know you. Because you show up like a villain in a spy movie. Because you sent anonymous flowers and equipment to my job. Normal people don't do that. Normal people say, 'Hi, my name is,' and they ask you out. They don't orchestrate a silent intimidation campaign." He considered this for a moment. "My name is Jin Woo, and I am asking you out to dinner." She stared at him. It was a battle of wills, and she could feel her own resolve starting to crumble under the sheer intensity of his focus. He wasn't just looking at her. He was studying her, memorizing her. "I'm busy," she said, the excuse flimsy even to her own ears. "Tomorrow, then." It wasn't a question. "I'm working." "The day after." "Look, Mr. Jin Woo," she said, exasperated. "I'm not interested. We're from different worlds. You have your galas, I have my double shifts and instant ramen. It's not going to happen." "Let me be the judge of that," he said softly. "One dinner. If, after that, you still wish for me to leave you alone, I will." It was the promise in his voice that got her. A promise that felt as solid and unbreakable as granite. She knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that he would keep his word. "Fine," she sighed, defeated. One dinner. His smile, this time, was genuine. It transformed his severe face, making him look younger, almost vulnerable. It was like a punch to the chest. And so, she had gone to dinner. He had picked her up not in a flashy limousine, but in a discreet black sedan. He took her not to some impossibly expensive, pretentious restaurant, but to a small, authentic Korean place tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. The owner bowed low when they entered, his deference to Jin Woo palpable. Over plates of bulgogi and kimchi jjigae, he had surprised her. He wasn't arrogant or condescending. He was a listener. He asked about her work, about the pressures and the small victories. He asked about her mother's illness, multiple sclerosis, and he listened with a quiet, focused empathy that felt more real than any pity she had ever received. For his part, Jin Woo found himself utterly captivated. She spoke with a fiery passion about her patients, a righteous anger about the inadequacies of the healthcare system, and a wry humor about the absurdities of her life. She was a vibrant, burning star in his cold, gray universe. He had spent his life surrounded by people who wanted something from him: his money, his power, his protection. Clara wanted nothing. She met him on equal footing, her principles and integrity her armor. He knew, even then, that he was lost. He told her he was in international logistics, a family business. It was the truth, just not the whole truth. His family did own a massive legitimate shipping company. It was the perfect front for their other, less savory enterprises. He hated the deception, but what was the alternative? To tell this woman, this beacon of goodness and decency, that his fortune was built on a foundation of violence, fear, and shadows? He couldn't. Not yet. One dinner became two. Two became a weekly ritual. He began to peel back her layers of defense. He saw the exhaustion she tried to hide, the constant worry for her mother that etched fine lines around her eyes. He wanted to erase it all. He wanted to give her the world, but he knew she would never accept it. So he did things quietly. He had his foundation anonymously pay off her mother's outstanding medical bills. He arranged for a top specialist to review her case, resulting in a new treatment plan that brought her some relief. Clara's best friend, Aisha, was deeply suspicious. "Nobody is that perfect, Clara," she'd warned over coffee. "A super rich, devastatingly handsome guy who is also kind, attentive, and wants nothing but to listen to you talk about catheter gauges? Red flag. A whole parade of red flags." Clara had defended him, but a seed of doubt was planted. There was a darkness in Jinwoo, a coiled tension just beneath the surface. Sometimes she would catch a look in his eye, a flash of something cold and ruthless, when his phone buzzed with a cryptic text. He would excuse himself, his voice dropping to a low, hard command as he spoke in rapid Korean. When he returned, the mask of the calm businessman would be back in place, but she could feel the shift in the air. The night it all shattered was 3 months into their fragile relationship. He had taken her to a private viewing at an art gallery. It was the first time she had agreed to enter his world so completely. She felt self-conscious in the simple dress she'd spent a week's salary on, surrounded by glittering socialites. But Jinwoo never left her side. His hand rested possessively on the small of her back, a silent declaration to the entire room that she was with him. They were leaving, walking towards his car in the quiet, private parking garage when it happened. 2 black vans screeched to a halt, boxing them in. Men in dark suits, armed with more than just pistols, spilled out. Clara screamed. Jinwoo's reaction was terrifyingly fast. In a single fluid motion, he shoved her behind him, shielding her with his body, and drew a sleek black handgun from a holster she never knew he wore. "Min-jun!" he barked into a device on his wrist. The world erupted into a cacophony of shouts and gunfire. Jinwoo moved with a deadly, practiced grace that was horrifying to watch. He was not a businessman. He was a warrior. He was a killer. The air grew thick with the metallic scent of blood and cordite. It was over in less than a minute. His own men, who had seemingly appeared from nowhere, had neutralized the threat. Several bodies lay still on the concrete floor. Jinwoo turned to her, his face a grim mask. There was a cut on his cheek, and his pristine suit was spattered with blood, but his eyes were fixed on her, filled with a desperate, agonizing regret. "Clara," he started, his voice rough. She stared at him, then at the carnage around them, at the gun still held firmly in his hand. The man she had been falling for, the kind, attentive listener, did not exist. He was an illusion. This was the reality, this violence, this death. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling, her body numb with shock. "Who are you?" He didn't try to lie. Not anymore. He took her back to his penthouse, a sterile, minimalist fortress of glass and steel overlooking the city. It was a place she had never been, a place that felt as cold and empty as his eyes had looked in that garage. He told her everything. He was Kwon Jinwoo, the head of the Kwon Syndicate, one of the most powerful Korean criminal organizations in the country, a position he had inherited from his father. He spoke of it as a duty, a birthright he had never wanted but could not escape. He laid it all bare, the smuggling, the extortion, the brutal enforcement of their territories. He confessed the whole, ugly truth. Clara listened, a knot of ice forming in her stomach. Every kind gesture, every quiet dinner was now tainted by this revelation. The money that had paid for her mother's treatment, where had it come from? Whose suffering had paid for her relief? The thought made her physically ill. "My life's work is about healing people," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and revulsion. "Yours is about this." She gestured vaguely, unable to form the words. "Hurt, fear, death. It is not who I want to be," he said, his voice raw with a pain that seemed to tear through his composure. "Especially not with you. Clara, when I am with you, I feel clean. I feel like the man I could have been." "But you're not that man," she cried, tears finally breaking free and streaming down her face. "You can't just put on a suit and pretend. The blood is still there." "I know," he whispered. He looked broken, the immense weight of his world finally crushing him. "But I love you. That, at least, is real." The confession of love, coming at this moment, was like a physical blow. It was the one thing she hadn't been prepared for. She loved him too. God help her. She loved this dangerous, complicated, violent man. But love couldn't change what he was. "I can't," she said, the words ripping from her throat. "I can't do this. I can't be the woman who waits at home, wondering if you're alive or dead, wondering who you had to hurt to come back to me. I can't be the woman who patches you up so you can go out and hurt more people." It was the most painful decision of her life. She was choosing her principles over her heart. She was choosing her quiet, difficult life over his gilded, bloody cage. She walked out of his penthouse, out of his life, and never looked back. The painful goodbye was a clean break, a surgical incision she had to make to save herself. The weeks that followed were a gray, featureless misery. Clara threw herself into her work, taking on every extra shift she could, seeking the familiar exhaustion that might numb the ache in her chest. Her apartment felt emptier than ever. The coffee shop on the corner was just a coffee shop now, holding no memories, no anticipation. She tried dating a doctor from the hospital, a kind, stable, perfectly normal man named David. Their conversations were pleasant. He made her laugh sometimes, but it was like drinking lukewarm water after tasting vintage wine. There was no fire, no intensity, no feeling of being truly seen. David looked at her and saw a nice nurse. Jin-woo had looked at her and seen the entire universe. Her mother, sensing her daughter's profound unhappiness, tried to comfort her. "You did the right thing, baby," she'd said, her voice gentle. "That life, it would have destroyed you." Clara knew she was right, but being right had never felt so lonely. For Jin-woo, Clara's absence was a physical void. His penthouse, once a symbol of his power, was now just a cold, empty box. The silence was deafening. He had pushed her away with the ugliness of his truth, and the consequence was a world drained of all color, all meaning. He became colder, more ruthless in his business. He crushed a rival faction with a brutal efficiency that even made Min-jun uneasy. The light Clara had brought into his life was gone, and only the darkness remained. "You should forget her," Min-jun advised one night as they stood on the balcony overlooking the city's glittering expanse. "She was from a different world. It was never going to work." "She was my world," Jin-woo replied, his voice flat and dead. He stared out at the city, but all he could see was her face, her eyes filled with disappointment and fear. He had done that. He had put that look there. It was this agonizing thought that led to the accident. A meeting with an old guard faction loyal to his imprisoned father had gone wrong. It was an ambush, a power play. They thought him weakened, distracted by his heartbreak. They were wrong about his weakness, but the ambush had been well planned. He and Min-jun had fought their way out, but not before Jin-woo had taken a piece of shrapnel to the shoulder and the head wound from the shattered glass. He had ended up at St. Jude's under a false name, in the one place he felt a ghost of a connection to her, and that was when he saw her again. When Clara saw his name on the patient roster, Park Jun-ho, it meant nothing. But when she walked into the private room and saw him lying in that bed, her heart stopped. It was him, thinner, paler, a stark white bandage wrapped around his head, but it was him. A maelstrom of emotions swirled inside her. Shock, fear, a fierce, unwanted wave of protectiveness, and a deep, resonant ache of longing. She had requested a transfer. She had told her supervisor she couldn't treat this patient, citing a personal conflict, but staffing was short, and her supervisor, unaware of the history, had insisted. "It's just for 2 shifts, Clara. Then he's being discharged. I need you." So she had stayed. She had put on her professional mask, her armor of clinical efficiency. She treated him as she would any other patient, checking his vitals, changing his dressings, her touch impersonal, her voice clipped and formal. She refused to meet his eyes, to engage in any conversation beyond medical necessity. Jin-woo watched her, his heart aching. Her presence was both a balm and a torture. He saw the rigid set of her shoulders, the way she refused to look at him. He had broken something beautiful between them, and he didn't know how to fix it. He wanted to tell her he was sorry, that he would do anything, change anything to get her back. but the words felt hollow in the face of the violence that had brought him here. Then came the overheard conversation. The two new guards. The switched drink. Clara's mind raced. It was poison. Or a sedative to make him helpless for another attack. Her duty as a nurse, her fundamental belief in preserving life, slammed against her fear and her broken heart. She couldn't let him die. Whatever he was, whoever he was, she could not stand by and let him be murdered on her watch. And so she slipped him the note. The 4 words that would change everything. Again. After she left his room, her shift finally over, she practically ran from the hospital, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had done it. She had warned him. Now it was in his hands. She had re-engaged, re-entered the storm. As she drove home, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. Finally, with trembling hands, she answered. Clara. His voice. It sent a jolt through her entire body. "How did you get this number?" she asked, her voice weak. "It doesn't matter. Thank you." His voice was low, intense. "You saved my life tonight." "I'm a nurse," she said automatically, the words a pathetic shield. "It's my job to save lives." "It was more than that, and you know it," he said softly. "They were my father's men, a test, or an execution. I'm not sure which." The casual way he spoke of it sent a fresh chill down her spine. "They've been dealt with." She didn't want to know what dealt with meant. "Don't call me again," she whispered and hung up the phone, her heart pounding. But she knew it was too late. The threads of their lives, once severed, were now tangled together again, pulled taut by an act of violence and an act of compassion. The incident in the hospital was a turning point for Jin-woo. Lying in that bed, helpless, knowing his life depended on a warning from the woman he had driven away, he finally understood. He couldn't have her and his empire. Not as it was. The darkness that defined his life would always poison any light she brought into it. Min-jun had been wrong. It wasn't about forgetting her. It was about becoming a man who was worthy of her. When he was discharged, he did not try to contact Clara. He knew words were useless now. Only action would matter. And so began the most dangerous war of his life, a war against his own legacy. He called a meeting of the syndicate's senior leaders. They were old men, men who had served his father, men steeped in generations of tradition and blood. He stood before them in a boardroom that overlooked the city, the very picture of calm authority. "The Kwan Syndicate is changing," he announced, his voice ringing with absolute power. "We are moving out of our traditional revenue streams. Effective immediately, we are liquidating all assets related to narcotics, extortion, and human trafficking. We are going completely legitimate." The room erupted. Shouts of disbelief and anger filled the air. An old, grizzled captain named Choi, his father's most loyal dog, slammed his fist on the table. "This is madness. You are spitting on your father's legacy. This is what we are. You cannot change it." "I can," Jin-woo said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet that silenced the room. "And I will. Our shipping and logistics company will be our sole focus. We will expand into technology and private security. We will be clean. Anyone who stands in my way," he let his gaze fall on each man in turn, "will be removed permanently." It was a declaration of civil war. The syndicate fractured. The old guard, led by Choi and backed by Jin-woo's father from his prison cell, saw it as a betrayal. The younger generation, who saw the writing on the wall in a world of increasing surveillance and international cooperation, cautiously sided with Jin-woo. The following year was brutal. Blood was shed on both sides. Jin-woo moved with surgical precision, dismantling the parts of his own empire that he found most repulsive. He used his immense fortune to buy out, shut down, or destroy the operations he was abandoning. He worked relentlessly, sleeping only a few hours a night, driven by a singular vision, a future where he could stand before Clara and not be covered in fresh blood. Min-jun was his constant shadow, his unwavering right hand, executing his orders with ruthless efficiency, even when he privately thought his boss was insane. Jin Woo was remaking his world. For her. Clara, meanwhile, tried to build a new life. She finally paid off her student loans. Her mother's condition stabilized. She broke things off with David, the kind doctor, unable to give him the love he deserved. She was going through the motions of living, but she wasn't truly alive. She followed the news, scanning for any mention of him. She read about a violent internal war within the city's underworld, about the mysterious rise of Quan Logistics as a major player on the global stage. She knew somehow that it was all connected to him, to her. One evening, a year and a half after she had walked out of his penthouse, there was a knock on her door. Her heart leaped into her throat. She knew, before she even opened it, who it would be. He stood there on her doorstep, looking tired, older, but different. The coiled, violent tension in his shoulders was gone, replaced by a deep, weary strength. He wore a simple dark sweater and trousers, not an expensive suit. There was a new scar, a thin white line that ran along his jaw. It made him look more human. "Clara," he said. His voice held a universe of longing. She stood there, speechless, her hand on the doorframe to steady herself. "Can I come in?" he asked. "Just for 5 minutes, like before." She stepped back, allowing him into her small, cluttered apartment. He looked around at her worn-out sofa and the pictures of her family on the wall. He seemed to absorb the details of her simple life, a life he had turned upside down. "It's over," he said, turning to face her. "The war. It's done. The old business is gone. Sold off, dismantled. The men who fought it are gone too." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't ask. "It's just Quan Logistics now, and some tech firms. It's clean. As clean as I can make it." She stared at him, trying to process the enormity of what he was saying. He had torn down his own kingdom. "Why?" she whispered, though she already knew the answer. "For you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He took a hesitant step closer. "I did it for you because you were right. I couldn't be that man and be with you. So I killed that man." The metaphor hung in the air between them, heavy and real. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness for what I was. I don't deserve it. I'm just asking if you can believe in the man I'm trying to become." He was laying his soul bare. The redeemed kingpin, stripped of his bloody crown, standing in a humble apartment, asking not for power or loyalty, but for a chance. All the walls she had built around her heart crumbled to dust. The loneliness of the past year and a half, the constant dull ache of his absence, it all rushed to the surface. Tears welled in her eyes. "You're an idiot," she breathed, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. "A crazy, reckless idiot." A slow, hopeful smile spread across his face. "I know." She closed the distance between them in 2 quick steps and crashed into his arms. He held her tightly, his face buried in her hair, breathing her in as if she were air and he had been suffocating. "Is this real?" she mumbled against his chest. "It's the only real thing," he murmured back. She looked up at him, her hands framing his face, tracing the new scar on his jaw. She saw the truth in his dark eyes, the pain of his transformation, the exhaustion of his war, and the overwhelming, all-consuming love he had for her, a love that had been powerful enough to remake a world. And then she kissed him. The reunion kiss was not gentle. It was a desperate, hungry collision of mouths and souls, a release of all the pain, fear, and longing that had defined their separation. It was the taste of a second chance, the promise of a new beginning built from the ashes of a violent past. It was acceptance. It was forgiveness. It was home. 3 years later, Clara stood on the balcony of their home, a modern but warm house nestled in a quiet wooded estate far from the city. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple. She held their 1-year-old son Leo in her arms, his small head resting against her shoulder. He had his father's dark hair and her warm, curious eyes. The The sound of the patio door sliding open made her smile. Jin Woo came to stand beside her, wrapping his arms around her and their son. He pressed a kiss to her temple, his familiar scent of expensive cologne and something that was just him enveloping her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly, his gaze on their son. "Everything," she answered honestly. Their life was not a fairy tale. The shadows of his past still lingered at the edges. Security was a constant, though discreet, presence. There were names from his former life that could never be spoken, wounds that would never fully heal. But he had kept his promise. He was a legitimate businessman now, a ruthless but respected CEO in the global marketplace. More than that, he was a devoted husband and a doting father. He treated her mother like a queen, ensuring she had the best care money could buy. He had built a new world for them, a safe harbor from the storm. He had found his redemption, not in escaping his legacy, but in transforming it, all for the love of a stubborn nurse who had seen the man he could be. "I love you," he whispered, his voice still holding that same intensity that had captivated her from the very beginning. She leaned back against his strong chest, feeling Leo's soft breaths on her neck. She looked out at the peaceful twilight, her heart full. "I know," she said, her voice filled with a love that had conquered worlds. "I know." This story is a testament to the transformative power of love and the human capacity for change. It explores the idea that no one is beyond redemption if they are willing to fight for it, and that true strength lies not in the power one wields, but in the courage to become a better person for the one you love. It reminds us that even in the darkest of circumstances, a single act of compassion can ignite a revolution of the soul. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. If this story touched your heart, please show your support by hitting the like button, subscribing to our channel for more dramatic tales, and sharing it with someone who appreciates a story of love against all odds. What did you think of Clara's decision to warn Jinwoo in the hospital even after she had left him? Was it her duty as a nurse or a sign that she had never truly let him go? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for our next story, we want you to choose. Should we tell the story of Min Jun, the loyal second in command, as he finds an unexpected love of his own while navigating the new, legitimate world? Or would you rather hear about Aisha, Clara's best friend, and her journey as she learns to trust again after seeing the dangers her friend faced? Vote in the poll in the comments section.